Introduced to Father George Novak, the pastor of this beautiful church, St. Mary, Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows Roman Catholic Church. Father George has kindly allowed us to have this pro-life meeting and film night. And thank you again from all of us for allowing us to use this church hall. Thank you, Father George. Father George, would you please say an opening prayer before our meeting begins?
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please rise. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Let us pray for the culture of life, using the words of our Holy Father, John Paul II. O Mary, Mother of the living, to you we entrust the cause of life. Look down, O Mother, upon the vast numbers of babies not allowed to be born, of the poor whose lives are made difficult, of men and women who are victims of brutal violence, of the elderly and the sick killed by indifference or out of misguided mercy. Grant that all who believe in your Son may proclaim the gospel of life with honesty and love. Obtain for them the grace to accept life as a gift and the courage to bear witness to it in order to build the civilization of truth and love. O Mary, our Mother, we thank you for Mary Wagner, your daughter, for her unique and courageous way of defending unwanted life in the wombs of the mothers. O Blessed Mother, protect Mary Wagner in her mission. Grant her needed wisdom, strength, and courage. And we pray that the life of the unborn be protected by Canadian law. For this intention, let us pray. Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Now for our main guests, we are honored in our first event to introduce to you Canada's most influential and loved pro-life heroine, Miss Mary Wagner. Miss Mary Wagner, who has spent over 3 years in jail for trying to protect the rights of unborn children, endeared herself to us, the pro-life friends, in solidarity with Mary Wagner that are putting on this meeting, by her courage, humility, great sacrifice, and religious fervor, especially when on her last visit to Poland at Jasna Góra in Częstochowa, transmitted to the whole world, we saw her pray in front of the Black Madonna, the most famous Polish icon depicting Mary, the Mother of God, holding the infant Jesus. Could you please welcome Miss Wagner with a warm round of applause.
Pronounced your name right, but I'd like to thank you so much for organizing this evening and all the people who assisted as well. And thank you again, Father Chris, for hosting us. And thank you also, Mr. Woodworth and Mr. Fonesca and Dr. Lugosi for coming. I'm really happy to see that we're really the church this evening, where you have some priests with us, some religious sisters, and including a new congregation here in Hamilton. Sister, can you tell me the name again of your congregation?
The Poor of Jesus Christ.
The Poor of Jesus Christ. So thank you for coming, all of you families and others. I'm going to try to be a little bit brief, and I'm not really given to a lot of speaking, but Here we go. I just would like to say, Father, you quoted from the Gospel of Life and the late Holy Father's prayer. Also, towards the end of that letter, our late St. Pope John Paul II turned to women who've had abortions. And I'm just going to paraphrase what he said, that he said, when you, and this is important because, as Dr. Lucosi mentioned, about 1 in 4 Canadian women will have aborted at least one of their children by the time their childbearing years are over. So all of us here in this room are touched in some way, if not in our immediate family, probably in our relatives or friends. So I would just like to paraphrase what St. Pope John Paul II had said, and that is, women, that if you can have the courage to bring to light, to face the truth of the choice of an abortion, that God is waiting there in His mercy to forgive, and that when that truth faces the mercy of God, that you can become among the most eloquent defenders of everyone's right to live. So I think that message is something that we need to bring forward in our work in this pro-life work, which is just the gospel of life work, is to keep that in mind and keep that in our hearts. I'd also like to say hello to anyone who's not maybe sure of the existence of God who's here tonight. I think most of us are here as Christians and Catholics, but maybe there's somebody who's just come to hear the talk. The posters went up all over, so I thank you if there's someone here among us, and I hope that you'll come to discover that God is God of love and truth, and we welcome you. So I guess I would like to start by saying that somebody who, well, it was mentioned in the film that I spent 3 years with the religious community, and that's the Community of St. John, Congregation of St. John. That was founded by the late Dominican priest, Father Marie-Dominique Philippe, and he died, it will be 10 years ago, on the feast of Our Lady of Czestochowa. I also like to say that he founded the community after his retirement from teaching philosophy in Switzerland, and so we should not be surprised that God, when he maybe in our older years, that he does something, and he did something with this priest, incredible, in his later stage in life. Something that Father Philippe had said to us often was, remember, there are many injustices in the world, but the first injustice is that we have turned away from adoring God. And so if we want to see justice in the world, we need to let God be at the center of our lives. And when we look at the injustice of abortion, we can see many reasons why that has happened. And for one reason or another, it's because God is not at the center. I've met many women in the jail who have aborted, and I'd say about 80% of the women that I speak with will tell me eventually that they have aborted, so it's probably even a higher number than I realize. And so many of them will tell me, I was a teenager and I aborted because my parents pressured me, or I just knew that they would reject me if they found out that I was pregnant, or my boyfriend pressured me into that. So I think, well, if our families were more welcoming of life, that could perhaps be one way that these children would be welcomed. So just to keep that in mind, Father Philippe, he insisted upon that no matter what the brothers and sisters do in their apostolic work, that they begin their day with an hour of silent prayer, and that they will go where the bishop invites them to go. Often it's chaplaincies and universities accompanying students, but also to be really open to the Holy Spirit, and that He will lead us maybe where we didn't expect to go, maybe where we are afraid to go sometimes. And but that's where it really, I think, something that I know I've experienced in my own life. I wouldn't be here today if He hadn't brought me to that level of, well, you can trust me. I came to Ontario 6 years ago to be close to Linda Gibbons, and maybe some of you know her or have heard of Linda. Linda is a woman in her late 60s, and when Linda had an abortion, and then 8 years later had a conversion to Christ. And in that conversion was an awareness of what had happened to her child. And it was such a deep awareness that she committed her life then to reaching out to women, and women at the abortion site. So she was one of what we call sidewalk counselors. She would go to, as many people do today, although those numbers have definitely dwindled, she would go and reach out to women who are literally walking in those doors. And about 30 years ago, I think, there was an injunction that was put into place that would make it illegal for people to be within a certain area, within a certain range around these places where children are killed. And Linda reflected and said, well, this was the right thing to do. God put this on my heart, and it's the right thing to do. Children are about to be put to death. Just because this law, which is unjust, therefore not valid, just because this injunction has been put into place, I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. And she really carried on as a lone soul for many, many more years, and has spent 11 years in custody in total over a span of 25, 30 years. John Bulsha there, sorry? 20, over a 22-year span. So she inspired me, and when I realized God was leading me down a very similar path, I realized, Linda, God wants us to work together. God wants us to work together whenever possible. So I came to Ontario with very little, really nothing, no friends, nobody I knew except Jim Hughes at Campaign Life, and that was just sort of on an acquaintance level. And how God provided, I just share with you because it was a lesson for me in trust. I came with very little money. I came with a place to stay for 5 days, and the thought that Linda, the understanding that Linda was going to be released from jail, and then we would move forward together. Well, I went to see her, surprise, on a car that was borrowed because I had no idea how to get out to Milton. So God provided just within those first few days so I could get out to Milton. And then when she said, I'm not going to get out of jail for a couple of months at least, I thought, okay, Lord, well, I've got 3 more days where I am. I guess you'll provide. And he did. And Madonna House in Cumbermere welcomed me, where I stayed for 6 weeks, and I felt like I really met the church there, and like I had a family base in Ontario. So I just share with you, and then from there, God has led me to so many other people. John Bulsha was the first one who met me, came to see me in jail, and thank you, John, for coming tonight from London. I just share this with you because it's not complicated to follow God, and from my growth and my faith from seeing God as someone who just wants to be obeyed, and that's it. That's all he really asks, is just obey him, just keep the commandments, but then discovering, well, the greatest commandment is to love, and what a challenge that is. But it's one that it's not complicated, in that he is trustworthy. He asks us to trust him, and we take a little step out in faith out of our comfort zone, and then he leads us much further. I would like to touch on the beginning of the pro-life movement, the gospel of life movement in the United States, when abortion was decriminalized. After a short number of years, there was a huge movement that developed, peaceful, nonviolent movement, the biggest civil rights, civil disobedience movement in U.S. history, and it was called Operation Rescue. And there were many lay people, mostly many family parents, but there were also religious brothers and sisters, priests, and even some bishops. And they just looked at it quite simply. Well, we know where our littlest, most vulnerable brothers and sisters are being killed. We have to be there. We have to be there for them, and we have to try to stop it if we can. And so they would gather in large groups, sometimes smaller groups, but there were, in the beginning, many large groups, and they would simply go to these places before they opened and stand in front of the doors. And what happened was, more often than not, police would come. If there were huge crowds, sometimes they wouldn't bother to arrest them, but there were many arrests made. And then the laws tightened up, and the penalty became much stiffer, and to the point where they brought in laws that were usually used to crack down on the mafia, and they were using them against pro-life people, and that basically broke the Operation Rescue movement, because people realized that they would lose their homes, they could lose their children, they could lose everything, material, and they could spend their lives in prisons. And in the U.S., the prisons are often very, very difficult. So that basically ended Operation Rescue. And the same had picked up in Canada, and similar results after it fell in the U.S. Although the penalties were not the same in Canada, the momentum lost there was lost here. I just touch on that because I think it's important for us to see that initially there was a matching of response to the gravity of what was going on as the killing And I think that we need to realize that as much as we are pro-life, that there's a desensitization that has occurred in the last couple of generations, and we don't see it. Joan Bell, who was leading the Operation Rescue movement, said, and still to this day keeps this, if a kindergarten class was going to be murdered tomorrow, and we knew this was going to happen, we would all mobilize somehow to protect those children, but we don't do it. And so there is this discrepancy, and we need to face that, I think, and that's part of our journey together in deepening of faith, is to ask God's forgiveness and ask Him to show us how we can repent and to move. And I would just like to say that it's not everyone can go put themselves in a position knowingly where they're going to spend long periods of time in jail. But there's also, first arrests usually a very short time in jail. So if anyone's already thinking possibly, just know that. You'll probably get out the same day, and I'd be more than happy to go with you the first time. So somebody went with me the first time, and she wasn't even expecting to get arrested, but she was a lot older than I was. And anyway, as one very good friend, priest, reminds me of another friend of his who's a priest. It's only a life. We're here for a really short time, so sometimes we can take it too seriously. But so first time you're not going to be in jail. And people have asked me a lot, well, you can still travel, and well, Poland is still welcoming me, and the United States is still welcoming me too. They sometimes give me a hassle, but so there you go. I think just this radical change, and radical in the true sense of the word, it can happen. Jesus started with 12 uneducated men, and we know the early church started with a lot of martyrdom, and I don't think I can expect that I'm going to be killed right now, but we never know. But we can see our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world who are being killed. I know of a missionary priest in Chad, and he had it's a very Muslim country, and he's a Catholic priest there, and he just within a couple kilometers they killed, I think, almost 100 people in a police zone. I mean, and we know daily the martyrdoms that are happening in the Middle East. We can share and we can be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in these places of the world, and then with our unborn brothers and sisters who are bearing the brunt of a comfortable society that is not willing to offer some kind of sacrifice for them. But if we trust in God, He can renew this country, which is so in need of that. And I thank the sisters who are here present, the Sisters of Our Lady Immaculate here, and the sisters of the poor. I'm sorry, the Sisters of the Poor of Jesus Christ, who are here as well. Just that witness for us. So please pray for me. I will be going to Poland tomorrow. I was invited there to speak again, so please keep me in your prayers, and we can all promise to pray for each other. Thank you again for coming this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner, for your great words of encouragement and motivation for us to be better pro-lifers, so that we can all help protect the precious lives of the unborn children. Also, your advice to trust God more and put our lives in His hands is, I think, very important too. Thank you very much. As you said yourself, I understand you're going to Poland for a visit for the World Youth Days. You will be in at least 12 cities and giving talks to many, many people. Please tell them that in Canada there are also many people that care about life. Thank you again. Next will be Mr. Jack Fonesca, a very eloquent speaker from Campaign Life Coalition, and we are very pleased that he is here, also since he is very pro-family and very pro-life, often acting as a spokesperson for numerous life and family events. Please welcome Mr. Fonesca with a warm round of applause.
Thank you. And before I get started, I've really enjoyed this cake. Christina, I want to show you how much I've enjoyed it. No, especially one part, the pink part. What did you make that with? Where are you? This is fantastic stuff. You can see I just ate through the strawberry part. Love it. I'll make sure Now, Charles had mentioned that he asked for 30 minutes. Well, I asked for 5 minutes, and they told me I had to speak for 10 to 12, so I'll have to stretch it out some way.
I'll take your time.
No, I'm truly honored to be here with an individual that so many consider to be a living hero in the pro-life movement. Mary Wagner is so humble and has made it clear in her writings and interviews, and even tonight, that she doesn't want the focus put on her, but rather on the plight of the children and mothers that she tries to rescue from abortion. Nonetheless, I have to commend Mary for an apostolate that so embodies faith and courage. In fact, I'll admit that the work she does brings me some level of discomfort. It troubles me in a certain respect, and that's because my full-time work at Camping Life, I labor in the same vineyard for the gospel of life as Mary does. But when I look at her life and what she's done, I recognize that my faith has never been strong enough that I would surrender my freedom as she has willingly done. My Christian faith has not been so strong that I would suffer the cross of a jail cell, and that humbles me. And when I think of all the times in my life that I shied away from speaking God's truth for fear of losing the respect of friends or family members, or for the potential embarrassment of being labeled a radical by the secular society around us, I can't help but feel a little bit ashamed for my lack of faith in comparison to Mary's and Linda Gibbons. She suffered all these and more for the love of our blessed Lord and his brothers and sisters. Now, Camping Life has been proud to support Mary's apostolate over the years, and in fact, we dedicated last year's National March for Life jointly to Mary Wagner and Linda Gibbons for their life-saving, heart-changing work. And so I want to reflect on a couple of things, a couple of themes in my talk here. You know that here in Canada, we do find ourselves, as was mentioned earlier, in a post-Christian society that has distinct parallels, I believe, to the pagan Roman world during the first 3 centuries of Christianity's existence. And I'll speak to that for a moment. In pagan Rome, being Christian was illegal. Believers were persecuted, and killing one's children by infanticide was socially acceptable and permitted by Roman law. The pagans in ancient Rome and Greece commonly practiced infanticide by leaving newborns exposed to the elements, where death would result from hypothermia, perhaps being eaten by wild animals, or if they were lucky, being picked up by slavers who would sell them. Pagans would expose their infants for any number of reasons that we might find familiar today. Perhaps feeling overburdened with too many children, deformity, imperfection, or not wanting any daughters. Now think about that. Don't all of these reasons sound familiar with abortion today? Now, how did this barbarism finally end in the 4th century? It was thanks to the witness of Christians who went out into the streets and into the woods, wherever the babies were abandoned, and brought them into their homes to raise them as their own. This Christian witness to the dignity of human life disturbed the consciences of the pagans around them, who gradually began to see that it was immoral to kill one's own children. Whereas pagans placed no value on human life, on infant life, Christians recognized that these children were created in the image of God and therefore had infinite value. The pagan world was converted by this witness, this Christian witness, and the sacrifice and faith of these early Christians. And finally, in the year 374 AD, Emperor Valentinian, a Christian, enacted a total ban on infanticide. Now remember, this was a practice that had endured for centuries, perhaps thousands of years. And obviously there is a parallel to abortion in modern society. But also another parallel that I see clearly is that what Mary Wagner is doing by going into the abortion mills and trying to peacefully persuade mothers to let their children live is like those early Christians who went into the streets and picked up the infants to save them from death. and like those early Christians, outlaws in a pagan world, who were despised because of their strict moral code. She too, Mary, is treated like a criminal and persecuted with full contempt of law. So Mary, I'd like to thank you for doing your part to reconvert our pagan society away from the new barbarism of abortion. May God richly bless your apostolate and increase your supporters. And, excuse me, as Charles suggested, I hope it will increase the numbers of people that will also emulate you and Linda to do the same kind of sacrificial work. Now, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes commenting on Mary's unfair treatment by the Canadian justice system. As you've heard, she spent about 4 years of her life in prison on account of her peaceful witnessing. And you look at her, she's not very old. That's a big chunk of her life, 4 years thereabouts. And I want to tease out the hypocrisy and dishonesty of our criminal justice system. During Mary's latest conviction, in which she was sentenced to 6 months in prison, the presiding justice, Katrina Mulligan, stated in her ruling, and I quote, "I did find your actions extremely selfish and narrow-minded. You interfered with their lawful enjoyment of their property." End quote. So the judge was concerned, Charles, was she, about lawful enjoyment of property? We should expect to find similar treatment, therefore, in other situations that are similar, other violations of these types of laws of enjoyment of property. But in fact, environmentalists are routinely allowed to seize private property and shut down business with little to no legal repercussions or jail time. In fact, their actions are often celebrated by the media and some politicians. Take the Line 9 Embro Pipeline project. In 2013, about 20 or so environmental radicals broke into an oil pipeline pumping station just outside of Hamilton in the small town of Westover. They kicked out the workers. Can you imagine that? They kicked out the employees working in the pumping station and took it over and illegally occupied the pumping station, this private business, for 6 days. 6 whole days they occupied the place before the police finally had to come out and arrest them and force them to leave. How long was Mary in the abortuary waiting room? How long would she have been there? And she didn't kick anybody, not the employees or the mothers, out of the waiting room. She was very peaceful in comparison to these environmentalists. And yet the police allowed the Line 9 protesters to carry on their occupation for 6 whole days. Police were trying as hard as they could to wait it out so that they wouldn't have to arrest or punish these radical environmentalists in any way. About 15 of these activists were released without any charges whatsoever. Of the mere handful who were actually charged, in the end, guess what the judge did? The judge granted discharges to 4 out of 5 of the individuals. He just let them off scot-free, while the 5th was given a suspended sentence with probation. So talk about turning a blind eye. Talk about favoritism and bias. Mary's peaceful entry into the abortuary waiting room, where she handed out flowers, doesn't even begin to compare to the 6-day, and some might argue, forceful occupation of a private business. Did the judge in Mary's case give her the light environmentalist treatment and basically brush it off as, an expression of free speech that abortuaries simply have to tolerate from time to time? The same way that oil and gas companies simply have to tolerate the expression of free speech from environmentalists from time to time? No. The Judge Mulligan felt compelled, and she stated this in her ruling, to give Mary the maximum possible sentence that she could impose for her attempt to save children from being killed. This contrast in sentencing says it all about our corrupt justice system. It reveals that our courts don't really care about private property or the disruption of business. That's just an excuse. What they truly care about is ideological in nature, and that is ensuring that Canadians can continue to kill children in utero. And why, pray tell, is that so important? It is imperative in their minds, I believe, so that people can continue to enjoy sex without responsibility. In their minds, in the minds of these elites, the judges, the lawyers, so many of the politicians and those in the media, the mind molders in the media, abortion is a backup birth control method. And since access to birth control has come to be seen as an indispensable guarantor of our sexual lifestyle and our lifestyle choices, therefore, access to abortion must also be treated in law and public policy as essential and indeed a right that guarantees the unfettered continuance of our lifestyle choices. Now, I'll come back to the significance of this in a couple of minutes. I was asked by the organizers to comment not only on cake, but also on the future of the pro-life movement and trends that I might see. And, you know, we have many hopeful signs. We have green shoots. We do have green shoots promising hope and new growth and new life in the future of the pro-life movement. One such example is the National March for Life in Ottawa, and with provincial marches right across the country, which has been run annually for 19 years and grows pretty much every year with huge numbers of youth. Up to 80% of the attendees are youth under the age of 25. You know, another hopeful sign is, and we see the fruits of this already, especially with young people who have access to the internet, is the arrival of in utero technology, in utero videography and camera technology that allows us a window to the womb, that allows us to see that the abortion industry is lying when they say that what's in that womb is merely a blob of tissue. It allows us, this technology allows us to see that it is a living, growing, developing human being. And that's important, and that will, I think, continue to be an important part of pro-life advances in the future. However, I think challenging times, and this is my opinion, are coming for the pro-life movement. Very challenging times indeed. And it will affect our ability to influence the culture in a negative way. Sorry, I should clarify that. We influence the culture in a good way, but negatively it'll affect our ability to influence the culture in a pro-life way. You know, of course, Justin Trudeau is arguably the most pro-abortion prime minister we've ever seen, and is expanding the abortion industry as fast and as far as he can, not only in Canada and provincially, but in other countries, using our public tax dollars to pay for the killing of children in Africa. But, you know, that's perhaps a smaller issue than the one I'm about to talk about, and that is the arrival of early chemical abortions. It appears from the numbers that early chemical abortions will, sometime in the near future, replace later-term surgical abortions. And in fact, my boss, Jim Hughes, mentioned recently that he was at a meeting where a Scottish pro-life leader stated that 70% of all Scottish abortions are now chemical abortions. In the United States, there are figures that an estimated 25%, roughly, of all abortions are now chemical abortions. And this is a percentage that is growing. And this will have an impact on how pro-life activism is done and how it can be done in the future, including outreach at abortion facilities the way that Mary and Linda do it. It includes outreach at through 40 Days for Life, and we know that in our community here in KW and Cambridge area, we've had a 40 Days for Life campaign since 2007, and it's been very effective. Not only has it witnessed and made people think about God and about the evil of abortion, but it's actually saved lives. Right here, and because of the 40 Days for Life, that peaceful, silent witness outside the abortion facility at Freeport Hospital has at least 1 or 2 confirmed lives saved, where children are walking around today because of that. And unfortunately, this type of pro-life ministry, its very existence, is threatened, in my view, because it'll no longer be possible, because these abortion facilities will no longer exist. Most abortions will be done chemically. And we'll have to change how we educate people about abortion, and we may find it more difficult to change hearts and minds. With the shift from surgical to chemical abortions, the unborn victim will truly become invisible for many people in society. And that is extremely dangerous for the already voiceless and unseen child, because to become even more voiceless and unseen than she already is, or he already is. Right now, when the mother and those around her see a baby bump, you have a visible reminder that someone else is taking up residence in there. And this psychology is important. Grace builds upon nature, and God uses our natural senses to convict our consciences. However, if and when that time comes that most abortions are committed at, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks, before the mother even looks pregnant, before she even looks at herself and says, you know, I look pregnant, there's a baby in there. A vast number of Canadians, I fear, who currently hold some pro-life sympathies, will lose that sympathy and fall into apathy. And even many pastors, priests, and unfortunately even some bishops will succumb to this apathy. And because, as we know, out of sight is out of mind. So I believe that both the church and the pro-life movement at large need to prepare for this more challenging future by beginning to confront more aggressively, more effectively, more directly, the root cause of abortion. And that is the contraceptive mentality. As was stated earlier, even in the movie that we saw, abortion is protected and enshrined because it is necessary as a backup should contraception fail. Pro-life individuals, pastors, priests, and especially bishops need to preach a full-throated gospel of life that includes clearly stating that artificial contraception and the contraceptive mentality is a moral evil that leads to abortion. Quite the contrary of what secular society tells us in the sex education industry. In large part, the abortion crisis we suffer today, in Canada alone with 100,000 children killed annually, is the direct consequence of Canada's bishops having rebelled against Catholic magisterial teaching. In 1968, Canada's bishops signed their names to the Winnipeg Statement, which openly rejected Pope Paul VI's restatement of Catholic doctrine that contraception is immoral and cannot be practiced by Catholics. Now, Canada's bishops at that time in 68 actually literally signed their names to this document of rebellion against the Pope and against magisterial teaching. And they said in the document that Catholics could, in good conscience, practice contraception. That document, the Winnipeg Statement, spread like wildfire throughout the globe. It didn't only affect Catholics, it didn't only affect the church and the culture in Canada, but in many countries around the world who used that document. The dissidents, the progressives in the church, used that document to promote the acceptance of contraception. The Catholic Church, until then, the bulwark against the spread of immorality in society, could no longer stop it, and it spread to every corner of society and every family, whether Catholic or not. And with that revolt against Catholic magisterial teaching, sacred tradition and sacred scripture and the natural law, those bishops at that time unleashed hell on earth. They brought about destruction upon unborn children. This contraceptive mentality also led to other evils that we've seen, such as massive marital infidelity, premarital sex, a pornography crisis which itself spawned a child sex abuse crisis that is growing. It spawned the acceptance of homosexual marriage, and now the diabolical confusion of gender identity theory, which is spreading like a cancer across the world. And this is all because of contraception, the acceptance of contraception, which destroyed the understanding that our sexuality, our very maleness and femaleness, is ordered towards the procreation of children, a good that is desired by God for the creation of new human souls to be with Him in heaven. So if we are to solve the root cause of the abortion problem, I think pro-lifers will need in the future to preach this truth more boldly, of course, to preach it in charity and preach it gently when necessary, but I think it's going to be necessary, and perhaps we won't have a choice but to preach it in future. So that's it, and again, I'd just like to thank Mary for her sacrifice of herself and her freedom for the unborn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fonesca, for all your great insights and eloquence, especially in comparing Mary's actions as in Roman times with Christians picking up newborns by pagans, and your very important ideas regarding contraception mentality in place right now and the dangers of it. Thank you very much. Okay, our fourth speaker is someone who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We are very pleased to have with us a former two-time Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre riding, Mr. Stephen Woodworth. Mr. Woodworth is also an attorney by profession and is best known for his Motion 312, introduced in the House of Commons in 2012 to study when a human being begins life. Is it at conception or when emerging from the birth canal? And unfortunately, when a baby emerges from the birth canal is still the legal definition of when a human being is recognized as such, but not at conception. Would you please welcome Mr. Woodworth with a warm round of applause.
Dobry wieczór. Good evening, everyone, and dziękuję. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. It really, I have to tell you, is a genuine personal pleasure for me to be here in a room full of good-hearted people. I tell you, I just can't get enough of it, and it's a great relief to be here compared to some of the other venues in which I have served. To Dr. Lugosi, wherever you are, I want you to know that when I was a lawyer and walked into court, it usually took me at least 10 minutes just to clear my throat. So you've done very well tonight. And as for Mr. Fonesca, I hope you won't mind if I say that I discovered in politics that 12 minutes seems like an awfully lot longer time when someone else is speaking than when I'm speaking. I, too, want to inspire everyone here with outrage. I want to inspire everyone here with passion. But I have to say that no words can ever be as powerful as the witness that all of us have seen here tonight on film. But words are all I have to give you, and so that I will. And let me begin by saying on behalf of everyone here, thank you to Dr. Caruk and to Christina Krolak for their initiative bringing us together tonight in the name of humanity. And I want to also say thank you to Jane Richard, who is here with us, and to Annalise Stedden, and to all of the other leaders whose rock-steady persistence over many years has held all of us together in the name of humanity. And of course, on all of your behalves, I want to say thank you to Mary Wagner and to Linda Gibbons and to the others who have endured merciless persecution so that they could teach real mercy in the name of humanity. We welcome to Kitchener Mary Wagner tonight. She inspires us because she has made herself vulnerable and yet continually demonstrates that in reality, she is truly invulnerable. Mary Wagner and Linda Gibbons are really the heroes of the resistance in the war that is being waged against basic democratic freedoms in Canada today. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion and worship, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of assembly. These are subject to relentless elimination by civil authorities and others in Canada today. So I have founded the Democracy Defense Initiative to mobilize political resistance to the abuse of power exercised by those seeking to deny basic freedoms in Canada. And if you are interested, I hope that you might leave me your contact information on the sheets I've left at the table at the rear of the room. I've put 4 piles out. There's at least 2 pens, so you can all sign your names up. I would like everyone in this room, if I possibly could, to give me your contact information so at least you can help me to keep people informed and to raise awareness of what's happening to democracy in Canada today. My goal, I believe, is the same goal proposed by those who have brought us together tonight: solidarity. And I promise you that you will experience greater satisfaction from standing shoulder to shoulder with others in a great battle than in almost anything else you can do with your life, in a great cause, in the name of humanity. And I guarantee you that pooling our time, pooling our talent, and pooling our treasure is the decision that offers hope for you and for your children and for your grandchildren. History is on the side of truth and justice. And that means that history is on your side. But you have to stand up, and you have to stand with truth and justice. So I've been asked to spend my 10 to 12 minutes with you tonight, sharing with you some political observations. And in the limited time that I have available, I'm going to give you some 5 key words which are essential to political success. And I'll just, first of all, rhyme them off. Delivery, compassion, power, policy, and persistence. So when you leave tonight, remember that. DCPP. Delivery, compassion, power, policy, and persistence. Delivery. Well, first of all, no matter how true or just your message might be, if people refuse to hear it, if they refuse to see the truth, you will go nowhere. Now, you've heard it said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I tell you that a smile is worth 1,000 words. Let people know that they can trust you. Use universal language that everyone, that all of your listeners can understand. And use that language in a manner that people will understand it. And to those who are Christians among us here tonight, I don't often use language which is exclusive to Christians, but those who are Christians among us tonight know that our Lord and Savior was the master at using language that others would understand. There was no New Testament when he testified. He sometimes referred to the Old Testament, but often he used parables and concepts that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with the lives of the people to whom he was speaking. That's what we have to do. Now, on this point about language, I want you to reclaim powerful words. Don't let anyone get away with telling you that it is progressive to deny basic freedoms. If you are defending the freedoms of others, then you are the progressives. You are the progressive ones. Don't allow anyone to tell you that social justice means falsely condemning any human being as non-human. When you propose recognizing the worth and dignity of every member of the human family, then you are the ones who are pursuing social justice. And let no one pretend that respecting diversity and inclusion means excluding and punishing people because of their religious beliefs, the way so-called progressives are asking the law societies to do in Canada today. In an Orwellian world where authorities dictate that words mean the opposite of what they actually say, we need to reclaim our language. We need to challenge those people. I could say a whole lot more about the importance of delivery in political work, but I've spent too much time already. Compassion. It took me a long time to learn this. But truth isn't always just beautiful. Truth is beautiful, but it isn't always just beautiful. Sometimes truth can be so sharp, it cuts. Sometimes the justice of recognizing the rightful claims of others means that someone else must sacrifice their heart's desire. We ought to know that our humanity makes us frail. Our humanity makes us fearful. And our human frailty and fears can lead anyone to embrace falsehood and to embrace injustice and much worse. So if we deliver truth and justice without the compassion necessary to account for the frailty and fears of others, how far do you think we're going to get? Well, not very far. Compassion is an essential companion of truth and justice. And that's not just a political principle, but it is in fact a sound political principle. Power. All too many of our political leaders will do and say anything to obtain power, to maintain their power, and to increase their power. And virtuous people, of course, see this as a vice. But I'm here to tell you that it's also their weakness. It's also a point of access for us to them. We have to learn to threaten the power of those people. We have to learn to offer them power. We must learn to deny those people power when they act unjustly. Policy. Pay no attention whatsoever when politicians start talking to you about themselves, about what's in their heart, about what label they apply to themselves. None of that really matters at all. All that really matters is their policy. How will they vote? Now, I have lost track of the number of times a politician has told me that they're pro-life. And I say to them, well, that's all well and good, but I really don't care if you're pro-life. What I want to know is whether your policy is pro-life. How are you going to vote? And if you say you're pro-life, but your policy is not pro-life, then fine, believe you're pro-life, but I don't really care. And I've lost track of the number of politicians who tell me that they agree with me, and then they start coming up with one excuse after another about why they won't vote with me. And I say to them, well, I'm very glad you agree with me, but the fact is I don't agree with you. And that's all it means. All that really matters is policy. So far, I've talked to you about 4 things. I've talked to you about delivery, about compassion, about power, and about policy. That's DC and double P. I want to come to the last and the most important thing that I can talk to you about, the 3rd P, and that is persistence. Some of you may have heard the saying, fortune favors the brave. Well, what does that mean? Take the other side of that equation. Those who succumb to discouragement are actually letting their opponents dictate their conduct. They're telling their opponents, thrash me hard enough and I'll leave you alone. If I could hand out one virtue to young people or to everyone, it would be persistence. That one virtue makes anything possible. It mingles hope with resolve. Persistence is actually the true test of character. And that persistence, by the way, is the light that shines in the character of Mary Wagner and Linda Gibbons. And what I want is to make that light shine out from you. So I want you to expect opposition. Expect a little pain and expect some loss. Expect to be defeated from time to time. But always, always refuse to let opposition or pain or loss or defeat hand over to unjust people even the smallest amount of control over what you do. So persist in the name of humanity. Persist. And I think my 12 minutes are up. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share ideas and also for your kind attention.